This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, let us start. So yesterday we discussed about auto wiring. auto wiring, which is useful for automatic dependency injection. As a developer, you need not to do any dependencies injection. Any dependencies means objects. Auto wiring, developer need not to do any dependency injection manually. Auto wiring will do automatic dependency injection of secondary types. Secondary types automatically IOC will inject. Secondary types automatically IOC will inject in auto wiring. So auto wiring we can do for setters and as well as is applicable for both setters and constructors. If you have constructor, through constructor if you want to do automatic dependency injection, or through setter methods also if you want to do automatic dependency injection, both are possible. We have auto wiring by type, by name, constructor and auto detect types. Auto wiring we have by type and one is by name. These both we use for basically setter methods. If you have setter methods, we use this by type and by name approach. By type, by name we use for setter methods, whereas for constructor we use constructor only. Auto wire by constructor we have, and the one is auto detect, which is useful for both. Auto detect, which is useful for both. And out of all this, the one is recommended is by type. As a developer, you need not to worry about naming conventions. Only you need to worry about types. But in case of by type, there is a problem of confusion when we have similar type that we resolve by using auto-wire candidate by setting it to false or else by doing manual dependency injection. So this is completely we tried through XML approach. We tried it through XML approach. So in XML approach, what we have done when we have classes like this, when we have classes like this, a car class is having dependency of engine. When a car class is having dependency of engine class, we have dependency of engine and fuel. So when you want to inject fuel here, all the secondary types, right? Engine is having fuel dependency. Without fuel, engine will not run, and without engine, car will not run. So here for car, the dependency is engine, and for engine, in the dependency is fuel. So when you have the classes and when you want to do auto wiring through XML, for each bean class, you need to configure a bean tag. For each bean class, you need to configure a bean tag here. You need to configure your fuel bean here with ID, and you need to configure engine bean, and you need to configure car bean, and you have to configure auto wire here. Auto wire. So when you have a secondary type dependency, for engine we have secondary type dependency, we are using auto wire. By setting here by type or by name, we are doing automatic dependency injection, right? This is how we have done so far using XML. But if you don't want to use this XML auto-wire configuration, if you don't want to configure this XML configuration here, if you want to avoid this XML based configuration, I don't want to say this auto wiring here. I don't want to keep this auto wiring here. I don't want to configure any auto wiring by type or by name here in my XML. So what you are doing when you have by type or by name along with your dependencies, you are putting a setter method here, setter method here and here. So without the setter method or constructor, you cannot able to use auto-wire here, right? Without having setter methods and this auto-wire property, you cannot able to use this auto-wiring. So I want to avoid here this auto-wire by type. I don't want configure it by type or by name or constructor. I don't want configure it, and as well as I don't want the setter methods also here. I don't want setters or constructors. I don't want setters or constructors. Always I want to focus on my business only. as this is a controller class, right? Generally, if it is a controller, we will have API methods here. I just want to focus on my API methods, which will handle the request which is coming from the UI. And if you consider this as a business, I want to focus on business logic. So for my execution, for my business logic, for my API, I need dependencies. I'll declare the dependencies in the class level. I will declare them in the class level, but I don't want to maintain the setters and constructors. They will create some clumsiness in my code. So I don't want to keep all that mess here in my class. Okay. And in XML file, I want to avoid this auto-wire configurations also. Still, if you want to avoid this auto-wire configurations and setter methods, who will inject this? I need a fuel object. Whatever fuel object container created, who will pass that fuel object here? And whatever engine object created after fuel dependency injection, who will pass that complete engine object here? All right. So we have annotation approach. So when you want to avoid setter methods and this auto-wire configurations through XML, right? What you need to do is on top of your dependencies. Here you have the dependency engine, right? On top of this engine dependency property, just you need to put @auto wired, @auto wired, one annotation given, @auto wired. Use this annotation on top of your dependency property. That's it. This is a great annotation that we are using. You know, regularly we use this annotation. Okay, this annotation is useful for automatic dependency injection. So when you configure auto-wide, what will happen? Generally here we don't have any auto-wide configurations. Container will create this fuel object, engine object. As you configured all these three beans in XML, right? Three objects container will create. Whenever you load this, right? Whenever you load your XML file, whenever you load this XML into IOC container, container will create this F object, E object, C object, means fuel, engine, and controller, car. So three objects will be created, and automatically what it will do, as I configured auto-wide here on this property, right? When if any bean property is having auto-wide annotation, if it find any bean, right? If it find any bean associated with auto-wide annotation, here engine bean is having a auto-wide annotation. Auto-wide annotation is having on which property? Fuel property. What it will do, once its creation is done with engine property, it will inject this fuel property into engine. First fuel object will be created. That fuel object will be injected into this engine because engine is having one auto-wide annotation. And that too, that auto-wide annotation we mentioned on top of fuel, which means what? Engine class is having the dependency of fuel. That fuel need to be injected. Container will understand, as you mentioned auto-wide here. So container will understand that this fuel being need to injected into engine. Similar way, here we have car class is having auto-wide annotation, and that we configured on top of engine property. So what will happen? It will check for the engine availability. If it find any engine, right, automatically that will be injected here. See, as a developer, you are not worrying about any manual dependency injections here, and you can avoid the setter methods also here. Then you can comfortably focus on your business logic instead of doing this setters and getters and all. So slowly, right? Slowly, what Spring is trying to doing is here. Slowly, it is avoiding. Slowly, it is avoiding lot of developer things here. So as a developer, you need not to worry about many things. Spring is automating it, right? It is trying to automating it so that no much bean configurations here. So we declared the bean FEC here, but we are not worrying about auto-wide here. Auto-wide is handling two annotations only. Just you need to configure @auto-wide, and you need to activate this auto-wide. You need to activate this auto-wide as you are using auto-wide here, right? You need to activate. To activate auto-wide annotation, we need to use bean post processor class we have, right? You need to use auto-wide annotation bean post processor. Auto-wire annotation bean post processor. The class name is auto-wire annotation bean post processor class. You need to use that class. You need to configure this class also here in your Spring XML file to activate your annotation, just to activate this annotation. to activate AutoWire. To activate AutoWire. To activate AutoWire annotation, you need to configure this annotation, AutoWire annotation being post processor class. You should configure it. Else, this is one way. Okay, this is one way to configure to activate AutoWire annotation. Otherwise, container will not recognize. You need to activate. You need to inform that I am using AutoWire annotation in my classes by configuring this class. Or else we have one namespace called context. By using this context namespace also, context colon annotation hyphen config. Using this annotation hyphen config, also you can activate annotations. Okay, we mostly use this one. Okay, we mostly use this one, annotation config. Even if you go to Spring Boot, we never see any configuration. It will activate everything automatically, Spring Boot. Okay, up to MVC you can use this. Okay, while using basic Spring framework. So either using AutoWire annotation being post processed, or else by using this context colon annotation config, you can activate these two annotations. Okay, AutoWire annotation you can activate. So once AutoWire annotation is activated, what will happen? Automatic dependency injection will happen. So what we are avoiding here, setter methods or constructors we are avoiding. We are not writing any setters or constructors in our classes, as well as we are not doing any AutoWire by type or by name through bean tags. So in bean tags, the configuration is avoided, and in classes, setter methods and constructors also avoided. Okay. Slowly, we are trying to reducing burden on developer. AutoWire annotation.
What is the difference between depends on and auto-wired?
Depends on is a different concept, right? Altogether, when we use depends on, we are saying I have a dependency. I have a dependency that you need to initialize first. Of course, both are for the might be same purpose. Initialization wise, to decide the order, right? I have a car. Will you make a car first or engine first?
Engine.
Yeah. So that is depends on. While making a car, we configure it depends on. Car is depends on engine. Car is depends on engine. So when we configure depends on, which means car object should be created after engine object created. So engine need to create it first. So here again, engine first or fuel first?
Fuel.
Without fuel, engine cannot be run. So must be fuel invented first, isn't it? So fuel must be invented first, then engines will come into the picture. So here we have engine is having dependency on fuel. So if you see here, right, depends on. If you see here, there is no much use of this depends on. As a developer, if you are sure that if you are configuring your beans, fuel, engine, and car beans here, if you are configuring it, you really need not to worry about it. If you configure them, that means what? You are deciding a order. If you don't follow this depends on here, then still no worries. You configure car first, engine next, then fuel next. In any order you can configure these beans. In any order you can configure these beans. There is no worry to your application. Okay, there is no worry. But when you configure depends on it, what will happen? Car is having dependency on engine and engine is having dependency on fuel. So this is how the order will create when you configure it. Fuel object will be created first always. So when you start container will create fuel object first, then next it will create engine object, then next it will create car object. Just to create these objects, we are putting a order using depends on. That's it. There is no much use of it. Get it?
Yeah, we cannot inherit any properties from depends on by using depends on.
I mean, if you want to use any properties of other bean class,
Yeah, can we inherit through depends on?
depends on just to mention to start that object first. Yeah, of course,
Okay.
if you have any such, right, I'm saying if you have such requirement, until unless you have that requirements, we never use it. Of course, these properties are deprecated. We don't have in our latest versions. Those all concepts they give an inheritance concepts. You can create this bean and you can inherit into another bean, but we never use it. Okay,
Okay. I
really in
have
real in our
dependency checks,
we will
but it is
yeah
not working, and I have seen in some websites that from Spring 3 onwards, dependency check is not available.
yeah. So
So,
many of the concepts which we are discussing are not there. Still, we never use them. Mostly there are hardly 10 plus annotations that we have. Once we reach to Spring MVC, right, we can make our application using that annotations itself. We never go through all these properties. Okay.
okay, okay,
Yeah. So just don't worry about these little tiny things which we are really not using it. Okay.
okay, sir.
Yeah. The main focus is we want to um, more strong on actual use case side. Okay, so we should able to implement any use case. To implement it, any particular use case, right, we should be strong enough to implement our controllers and use cases and the services whatever we want. We need to understand that level, right? So yeah, fine. So depends on to create objects. Autoware is for automatic dependency injection. Okay, so depends on is not at all related to this. Okay, so when you configure autoware means automatic dependency injection. So basically we need that objects, otherwise we can't execute the flow. So car need to call business class methods. I got a API request here. User is calling API request here. And this API needs to call these business methods. So when it wants to call another class methods, a class wants to call another class methods, definitely this class needs this class object. So that's why I need to auto-write this object here. Similar way, this business class methods wants to call this PL class methods, if there are any. So that this PL class object I need here. So that's why I'm injecting that object here. Okay. So auto-wiring you can achieve by using this auto-wired annotation also. Still in auto-wired case also there is a problem, right? As I said yesterday, here if I create two beans, if I create two fuel beans here, if I have one more bean class here with a different ID, okay, one is F1 and one is F2. If you have two beans, bean 1, fuel 1 bean and fuel 2 bean, you have two bean classes here. You have two bean classes here. You have two bean classes here, right? So when you configure two beans here, fuel beans, when you configure AutoWire here, well, before injecting into engine class, it will check for the fuel object. It will find two fuel objects. Then again, it will confuse. It will ask which one I need to inject. Again, same thing, right? You can configure here AutoWire candidate false for one bean. That is one way, or else you can use at the rate qualifier. There is one more annotation name called at the rate qualifier. There is a one more annotation name called at the rate qualifier. In this qualifier, you can configure the bean ID here, right? If you want to inject F1, you can configure F1 bean here. Only F1 bean will be injected. If you want to F2, put F2 here. So whatever qualifier reference you pass here, that qualified bean only will be injected here. So this is how we resolve. This is how we resolve bean confusion. Okay. So while doing auto wiring based dependency injection, when it finds two beans with same type, there is a chance of confusion. So to resolve that confusion, we use this qualifier. Qualifier will avoid that confusion as we are configuring that particular bean ID here. Okay, so qualifier is useful here to avoid this confusion when we have multiple beans with same type. Okay, so as I said, right, again, this is rare case. When you have multiple beans with same type, then only this confusion will arise. Okay, let us see. Let us use yesterday's XML example only. Okay, so here we have three beans. Car is having a bean engine. We were using setter method to inject it, but as I said, right, you really not required the setter method to inject it. So setter method is not at all required. Even if you want to keep the setter method also, no issue. On setter method also you can use @auto_void. You can put on top of setter methods also. If you want to, put some logic here instead of injecting directly, if you want to filter out some parameters here, you can use setter methods. Otherwise, setter is not at all required. You can keep this auto-void on top of the property. You can use auto-void on top of constructors also, but on setters, on constructors, it really not required. You can keep auto-void on top of bean property itself. Okay, otherwise let me keep this example with setter method only. On top of setter you can put, on top of constructor also you can put it. Okay, on setters, on constructor also we can put. If you have a parameterized constructor, this is how. If you have here also you can put auto-void. I'm just commenting it. Okay,
Sir,
yeah,
instance of @void before declare method name, can we declare before the class name?
on top of class name.
Can we
Yes.
declare there?
No. This is not allowed. This is allowed only for on top of setter, constructor, and property only. So basically, auto-wire annotation meaning what? Wherever you configure this auto-wire, those dependencies need to be injected automatically. That is the purpose of auto-wire. Dependency injection on top of, when you configure on top of a particular method or a constructor, it means that that constructor or that setter you need not to call, automatically container will call. Or if you configure on top of property also, it will access and it will inject it. But if you mention on top of class, what does it mean? It will not understand, because class can have many number of properties. So out of them, few are maybe need to be injected, few not. So few are business methods. So that's why they are not allowing us to use auto-void annotation on top of class. You can use on top of setter, on top of constructor. You can use auto-void on top of property as well. Okay, so generally we keep on top of property. Even setter method also I don't encourage. Just keep it on top of your property itself. And here I have engine class. Same thing, on top of setter and constructor also you can put it, but this is not at all required. You can keep it on top of property itself. And what about field? Here I have a field name which is primitive, so I can't auto-wire it. Anyway, I need to pass this value through setter method, or from properties file also you can read. Right? We can read this from properties file also. That I'll show you as a separate example. Now here you need to create your beans, fuel 1 and fuel 2. I have two fuel beans, petrol and CNG, and this auto wiring is not required here. and this manual dependency injection also not required. So automatically dependency injection will happen into car class and engine class. As I don't have methods, you may not observe anything here, whether it is doing it or not. So what I'll do, I'll create a method here, public void start car. From here I'll call engine dot in start engine. I have a statement start engine, in start car I have a start car. So from car I want to call engine. If the dependency injection is ready, then only you could able to call it. If dependency injection not happened, you cannot able to call this. You will get null pointer exception. So to prove that dependency injection is happened, I am calling it. Okay. And here also field dot get field name. We don't have any getter method, right? Call get field name. So just to prove that this field class is having or field class object is injected, I'll get the field name here. Sys out field dot get field name. Okay. So here we are not doing anything, any dependency injection manually, apart from injecting petrol and CNG into fuel as it have primitive properties. Into engine and car, automatic dependency injection will happen. But you need to activate the annotation, right? Here you need to configure that annotation class. The annotation class name is AutoWire annotation being post processor. AutoWire annotation, AutoWire annotation being post processor. This is the class. Configure this, okay? Yeah. So configure this AutoWire annotation being post processor class here. Just being class. Configure your class here. So if you configure this class, what it will do, it will activate your AutoWire annotation. Just to activate your AutoWire annotation. Activate AutoWire annotation. Just to activate the AutoWire annotation, we need to use this. That's it. Now load this XML and see whether the injection is happened or not. Get your car object, get the car class. Car dot start car. Fuel names injected. Now starting car. Start car calling start engine. And engine getting fuel from fuel object, which is AutoWire. In engine, we are able to getting the petrol, which is injected into engine. And we could able to call the start engine from start car because engine is injected into car. Okay. So the dependency injection happened automatically. Why there is no confusion? There are two beans, right? Two beans. And why confusion is not there? Because AutoWire will use by type as well as by name also. So here, if you see, we have fuel, name is fuel dependency with name is fuel, and in XML file we have one fuel with same name. This fuel we have with same name fuel. So that's why it is not confusing. If you configure like this, fuel1 and fuel2, then it will confuse. Now we got the exception. Bean creation exception, reason, expecting single matching, but found two, fuel1 and fuel2. So to resolve it, either you can configure this ID on top of this fuel dependency using @qualifier. Using qualifier, you can configure bean ID here, fuel1, or else you need to maintain this name as a reference here for at least one bean. Okay, so that will by default use like a by name when you use the name. But you have, if you want to use only by type, and there are unique IDs here, so this ID if you want to configure here, you can configure using @qualifier. Now only this qualified bean fuel1 only will be injected here. You run it, now there is no confusion. It will inject fuel1 bean, which is petrol. If you want to change it, here in qualifier you need to pass fuel2, then fuel2 will be injected. This is how you can resolve confusion also. Now CNG injected. Okay, so when there is a confusion, then we go with this qualifier annotation. Similar like auto void, from J2W also we have an annotation name called @inject. We have @inject. It's a Java annotation, not a Spring annotation. We can use this one as well. Okay, we can use this one as well for auto wiring, but mostly we use auto void only, right? We use auto void only. Need not to worry about inject, a J2W annotation. We always use auto void. Inject also similar one. Are we clear?
What is inject? Can you repeat?
Inject also a similar annotation for dependency injection. It's a J2W annotation. It's a Java API annotation, which is not part of Spring.
Okay.
But the purpose is same. You can use that one as. Let us see. Basically, we need to. I'm thinking we need to activate that, but let's see. We need to activate maybe context colon annotation config we have to use to activate that. Now Indian class, let me comment this auto wired in place. Let me use @inject. Okay, just replacing auto wired with inject. Only for Indian class I have used it. Okay. For car class I have auto wired only. In car class I am using auto wired only. For engine only I am using inject. Now run it. Oh, yeah, this is working. See, engine is injected into car class. Otherwise, you cannot able to call here, right? I mean, into engine class we injected fuel. So here we could able to get the. We are able to getting the fuel name here, but we injected by using inject annotation. Okay. The purpose is same. If you want to use it, you can use. It's a your Java annotation. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let us see. Yeah. So from this example, what we understand is for the conclusion. Okay. As a developer need not to worry about this auto-wire configurations here, because as a developer you need not to worry because we are using annotation there. So you need not to configure any auto-wire by type or by names here, and as well as a developer you need not to use any setter or constructors here. Of course, if you want to use them, you can use, but not recommended, not really required also. So you use generally at the rate auto-wide on top of your property itself. So it will do directly property dependency injection. It won't use any setter or constructor. Directly it will pass it into your reference. Okay. So as a developer, you really need not to worry about this auto-wire configurations there. Just you need to mention annotation wherever you have a dependency in your bean class. Okay. So now still as a developer, we have few more configurations left here. You are creating these beans here in XML file. Fuel1 bean you are creating, fuel2 bean you are creating, and engine bean, car bean. These multiple beans we are creating here. Somehow we avoided this dependency injection. Manual to automatic dependency injection we moved. And what about this bean configurations? Still developer is doing manual bean configuration here, right? As a developer, the developer is doing still the manual bean creations only here. So here he is doing the manual dependency injections only. As a developer must do this manual dependency injection only. I mean, manual bean creation only you are doing here. So developer need to configure it. Developer manual bean configurations doing. So somehow we avoided manual dependency injection. We moved it to auto wiring. Still you are doing manual bean configurations. So if your application is having 1,000+ bean classes, all the 1,000+ bean classes you need to configure here. Okay, and of course there would be a problem if you configure through XML. If somebody tried to modify existing bean classes, if somebody by knowing or unknowing, if they delete it, you know there is a chance of that it will create issues. So if you want to avoid this manual bean creations, and if you want to reduce that burden on developer, instead of doing this manual bean creations and manual dependency injections, right? Dependency injections anyway they give an auto word, so that you are not at all doing manual dependency injection. Automatically container is taking care of it. So the manual bean creation also we are doing here. If that can also be avoided, how we can avoid it? So to avoid it, what they did, they given few annotations. Okay, they given few annotations here to make it automate. They given few annotations. One is config, component, controller, rest controller. We have two controller types. One is controller and one is rest controller. And one is at the rate service, at the rate repository. These are the most important annotations: component, controller, REST controller, service, repository, and there is one configuration. There is one configuration. So these all are the annotations that will avoid bean configurations here. So we need to use these annotations to avoid bean configuration. So where we need to use which annotation? For time being, forget about this REST controller and configuration. Yeah, and component. So where we need to use these annotations? I have a controller annotation, service annotation, repository annotation. Where I need to use? Simply I have a beans here, right? Simply I have beans here. I'm configuring my fuel bean and engine bean and controller bean. For everything I'm saying bean only. Either it is a controller or a business class or a a DAO class. For everything we are saying it as a bean only. When it comes to the annotation, when it comes to the annotations, they given different names for each layer. They given different names. If your class is controller class, consider car is a controller. If your class is controller class, on top of your controller class you need to use one annotation name called @controller. If it is a controller, you need to use controller, or else REST controller. If it is a API controller, you need to use REST controller. If it is a simple controller, @controller. If you are building APIs, you need to use REST controller, where you need to put on top of your class name. While creating this car class, on top of class name, you need to use either one, controller or REST controller. And for why? Because using controller is I'm considering my car class as a controller class, which is the first class executes from the UI. And here I have an engine class. Consider if engine is business class. If engine is business class, on top of business classes or on top of service classes, we call them general service. Okay. So on top of your service class, what you need to do? You need to configure here @service, @service for all our business classes. @service. And if it is a DAO, if you are doing database operations, right? On top of database class, you need to use class PL. You need to use @repository. @repository. You need to use @repository. When you configure these annotations here, as a developer, you need not to do any manual bean configurations also here. You can completely avoid these bean configurations. You need not to create any beans. Automatically, these classes will be registered. Before that, what was happening? We configuring these bean classes here. Finally, whenever we load it into IOC container used to register all your beans. Now I'm not putting any configuration here. Still your IOC will scan your packages, all your packages, wherever you have these controllers and services and these repository classes, right? Generally, we create packages. Inside packages, we put all these classes. So your IOC container will scan all the packages and it will read your classes and it will register them. It will read your classes and it will create objects for them, and as well as it will register into IOC context. For that, you need not to do any bean configuration. See, as a developer, you no need to touch XML file. So wherever you want to implement your controller, put @controller or REST controller. And when you want to call from controller to service, on top of your services, use @service. And if you want to implement repository, which means DAO classes, use @repository. So that these classes will be registered automatically. Like how automatic dependency injection happened, the same way these objects also will be created automatically by scanning your packages. By scanning all these packages, container will create automatic object creation. Automatically object creation also can be done. But this one, what we will do in our XML file itself, in our Spring XML file, we configure this. context colon annotation hyphen config. To activate your annotations, we use this, right? Anyway, we are using their AutoWare annotations. If there is any dependency, you can use it. To scan your packages, there is one more namespace called context. In the same namespace, there is one more attribute called context colon component hyphen scan. And here you need to pass base package. You need to pass base package. The package name you should pass here. The package name you should pass here. So let's say if you are using com.ds. From here, if you have web, and for web you have web, for service you have service, and for repository you have repository. If all that packages, if this is the parent com.ds, keep the parent base package name here. That's it. What it will do, whenever you load this, right? Whenever you load this XML into your IOC container, whenever you load it into your IOC container, your embedded container, whenever you load it into your application context class, whenever you load this here, what it will do, IOC will scan this package first. IOC will scan this package first. It will scan this package. So in this package, we have many classes. So it will go read each class, car class, engine class, and fuel class. It will read your class at runtime, and it will create objects for each of this class. It will read car class object, engine class object, and fuel class object. That's all. As a developer, you need not to do any bean configurations also. Okay, simply you can use controller for controllers, service for service classes, repository for repository classes. Just you need to scan it. That's it. Automatically, it will create objects for your classes also. So going forward, if I implement any new class, if I put that new class in this base package itself, still if it is a new class also, it will register it. But you need to keep all that classes into this package itself under com.ts. Anyway, one time if you create packages, same package structures we follow for new upcoming controllers or services or repositories. Just you need to put these annotations on top of your controller and service repositories. That's it. That new classes also, when you do new deployment, right? Whenever you restart your server, automatically the new classes also will start creating objects along with your old classes. We call all those annotations as stereotype annotations. Okay. Automatic bean creation. Build path, configure build path. Same thing, right? Use this here. Same example. Earlier we used to create these beans manually here by configuring this here. Now I don't want to configure any bean here. I don't want to put any bean here. Remove all the beans. And just on top of, if you treat it as a controller, just you need to put at the rate controller and engine is my service. So I'll put at the rate service, and I don't have two beans, so qualifier is also not required. I'll create only one fuel object. Just on top of fuel, use at the rate repository. Just at the rate repository, and this fuel name, if you want to inject from any properties file, we can inject, but what I'll do, I'll assign a default value here. Now I have three beans here. This is DAO. On top of DAO, I'm using repository. And this is engine. On top of engine, I'm using service. It's a service class business. And here is my controller. On top of controller, I'm using @controller. Okay. If you want to see whether these objects are creating or not, override default constructor and put a statement here, so that you can see the default constructor is calling or not. While object creation default constructor will be called, right? So you can observe that object creation will be happened automatically. Fuel class object also automatically will be created by your container. That's it. This setter anyway we are not using, remove it. Now dependency injections happening automatically and object creations also happening automatically. Just you need to scan this beans package. Here you need to scan the package. We need to use this namespace. XML schema based configuration we do here. Okay, you need to use bean context namespace. Using context namespace, first you need to activate your annotations and you need to scan your package. Context colon component scan base package. The package name is not com.ts, it is beans package. You need to give your package name here. That's it. Now whenever you load it, right, whenever you load it here, container will read all your classes from that package and it will instantiate. As usual, they will work. See the three objects created: car object created, engine created, fuel created. Then we could able to call car method. Car is calling engine and engine is able to getting fuel. So developer, relax here. You need not to worry about any configurations. It's a completely zero configuration. So completely zero configurations. In Spring Boot, we have this style. We never do anything. I mean, we don't do anything. We always use annotations only. Even XMLs also will be avoided there. Very few classes, right? If you are using Spring Framework, Spring MVC, for very few classes, we do configurations here. Like if you have any data source kind of thing, connection pools, if you are creating, right? Connection pools, or any JSP forwardings, JSP or HTML forwards we use, right? That forward configurations. Very few configurations which are not able to, I mean, they also you can configure in class itself. I'll show you that concept. Very few we configure. If you want to do modifications through XML here, if you don't want that configurations also here, we can avoid it. Very few we configure, but still if you want to move them to programmatic style, we can move. We say those are configurations. Very few configurations we move. That also we have two styles. We will discuss it. Okay, tomorrow I'll show you.